Today on This Week Health.
Cybersecurity is about paying attention to details. In all these stacks that we use, there's so many buttons and dials. It's very easy for you to lose the staff that knew how to use a tool that you don't have now. That problem is only going to continue. And I think the integrated platforms are going to come in and have to simplify it.
Welcome to Newsday, a This Week Health newsroom show. My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, a set of channels dedicated to keeping health IT staff current and engaged. For 5 years, we've been making podcasts that amplify great thinking to propel healthcare forward. Special thanks to our Newsday show partners, and we have a lot of them this year, which I am really excited about. Cedars-Sinai Accelerator, ClearSense, Crowdstrike, Digital Scientists, Optimum Healthcare IT, Pure Storage, SureTest, Tausight, Lumion, and VMware. We appreciate them investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders. Now, on to the show.
Here we are for the Vive conference. It's a Newsday show, so we're going to be talking about the news. And the news is essentially the conference, because this is where we're at. I have David Ting, founder and CTO with Tausight, and Drex DeFord. I rarely say your last name anymore.
I know, it's weird.
With Crowdstrike.
Yeah.
And we're right here next to the Cybersecurity Pavilion, which is where you guys are located. Let's see, Crowdstrike, what, 2 doors down?
2 doors down.
Man, it's exciting.
The 2200 aisle, right? That's where it's happening.
Yeah, the 2200 aisle. Of course, by the time this airs, nobody will
remember.
This will be
news.
blank concrete.
There'll be a boat show in here.
A boat show. They're going to come in and go, where are those guys? Oh, man. Hey, so I want to talk, let's start with cybersecurity. We could talk GPT-4, because that's the thing I've heard probably said more than anything else.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start with cybersecurity. What's top of mind? What's news about cybersecurity at this conference? David, we'll start with you.
So I've had a lot of customer contracts.
Hosted buyers, yeah.
Yeah, and the hosted buyer meetings have been great. I think the most alarming things were, the Washington, D.C. with the congressional medical records and how that's going to open up a lot of government.
Once it gets personal,
exactly.
It changes everything.
I think that's what they were
saying. Once it happens to the
once
government
officials and their families.
Oh, wow.
The awareness is going to be much higher.
So what actually happened there?
Somebody broke in and got all the medical records for I think it's congressional members as well.
Yeah, congressional and maybe staffers too.
And staffers. Yeah. It's quite a large trove.
So congressional staffers, that's bad.
That's bad, but it's raising more awareness. The CIO testified to that audience, and she said, here's where it becomes personal, and she said that the audience was much more receptive to the value of protecting the healthcare system.
What makes a breach bad? The Lehigh Valley Health, I saw you posted about that.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, right?
It is. I mean, cancer patients exposed, all sorts of photos and whatnot. But I've made the case on my show, and I don't know if this is a proper case, but it's not the sensitivity of the data as much as it is the negligence potentially that goes on. That's where I think is the unforgivable breach. If you haven't done the due diligence, if you haven't put the frameworks together, if the executive leadership team over and over again says, nah, we're going to move the money over here. And that's what I think is the unforgivable breach.
Yeah, I think there's the challenges of how much cybersecurity is enough to say you're doing what the reasonable man would expect for a cybersecurity protection for your organization. That's a tough line to find. And I think a lot of the stuff that's happening with Senator Warner and the report, the recommendation that kind of came out, a lot of the comments that have come back on that, the conversation around whatever the terrible term is going to be, meaningful use for cybersecurity, and what goes along with that. We've talked about this, be careful what you ask for. When the government comes to help, sometimes there's unintended consequences. But I think we're going to have to put something better together that helps organizations understand the expectations are this. And if they're just recommendations, the poorest health systems are not going to do that. They're not going to do it until it's mandatory. So we have to be very thoughtful about what the mandatory is and what it means and how it's implemented and what the carrot and what the stick is and how we're going to roll these things out and keep them running once we've got them out there.
As I think about cybersecurity and what's next, I really don't want to talk about what's next 10 years from now. What's next over the next year? What are the gaps that we're starting to see people go, hey, you know what? It was okay for that to be in the red or even the yellow last year, but this is probably something that needs to be moved on the security framework into the green.
Yeah, for us, one of the things that we're seeing is we talk to customers and prospects, and the work that we do in incident response, identity protection, identity threat protection has become incredibly important. There was a long period of time where hackers hacked into your organization, but today, because you can be part of the target breach or some other breach, and the bad guys have collected all the data from that breach, all the customers, all the usernames, all the passwords. They have big data analytics people too, who sit down with that data and cross-reference it with names of people who work at hospital, healthcare organizations, and then say, maybe we should try this password on that account. The result is about 80% of major incidents that happen today across the board involve logging in. These are bad guys who are logging in with legitimate credentials. So you're not looking for a needle in a haystack now, you're looking for a specific piece of hay in the haystack because they look like they're supposed to be there. And until they do something that they're not supposed to do, if you have traps set for that, then you're going to be able to see them and find them and do something about it. But it's a very challenging situation. Identity to me is kind of like the next big frontier that we're attacking at Crowdstrike.
So you're the founder, CTO, least likely to do your own marketing. So, but you really are.
I know.
But that's where I'm going to go next, which is essentially it's finding the, what did you say, needle in the haystack?
It's not a needle in a haystack.
It's hay in the haystack.
It's a specific piece of hay in the haystack. Yeah.
But that's what you guys are focused on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, what does that look like to find? They're getting in legit. I just logged in as Dr. David Ting, and I'm on your system. Now, I should only have access to Dr. David Ting's patients and that kind of stuff, but I've broken out, and now I'm starting to move some stuff. Are we able to see that they're moving that stuff?
We can with our technology. Obviously, we track what happens with the data. So we take a very data-centric approach to say, the thing that you want in addition to physical cyber, which is your infrastructure and all the pieces associated with that, is what happens to the logical cyber, the data that runs your business or powers your business, and what's the ecosystem around that? Who uses it? What application touches it? Where is it going? Where is it being stored? How is it being moved? And it's all around the PHI data, because at the end of the day, that's what healthcare runs on. And understanding that chain of custody and that chain of use starts to give us better visibility to how we can better protect it. One of the things I've noticed is the audacity of the attackers these days. They will stop at nothing to disrupt your system, steal your data, figure out how much data they can take away and extort you for it. So it's the exploitative value of the medical records and the credit information, but it's also, in addition, the extortion value of, hey, I'm going to hold you ransom for the data that you own, and with my threat to release it to the public, and you get hit twice.
Yeah, for sure. That extortion thing also now extends to the patients themselves. So you start to see adversaries calling patients and saying, we have information, let me give you a couple of pieces of it to sort of show you that I can, it's terrible.
There's no limit to what they will go to these days.
So there's two questions, I think. One is, have we gotten to the point where the reputational risk is enough that it's actually impacting the financials of a health system, or the reputation and the trust level of the organization?
I think some of it depends on where the health system is, right?
Yes.
If there's a breach at a health system, a hospital, that's the only hospital within 100 miles of where you live, and it's the only hospital that your employer will let you, through your insurance plan, go to, and there's a breach, your decision doesn't really exist. Your ability to kind of say, well, I'm not going to use those guys, I'm going to choose these guys on my health plan next time, that isn't really an option. So yeah, I think it hurts, and it certainly may hurt the fundraising arm of the healthcare organization to get new donations and that kind of input to help make that system.
But it's not a serious...
Unless you're
I think
in a
it depends on where you are.
competitive area.
If you're in a competitive area, I think
I've heard different CIOs tell me that after a breach, they can watch
a little bit
the intake of patients. And one of them said they recognize that it would take up to 2 years for the same patients, if they do come back, to basically regain trust. I thought, wow, that's a really long window. He said, we have the data to show it.
I think the challenge is, even in a fairly populous area, I'm connected to my primary care physician. I've said before, and it's probably not a good taste, but there's very few people that have seen me naked, but my primary care doctor has seen me naked, and I want that number always to remain pretty small.
Correct.
So it's like that. I don't want to go start seeing, and my wife would say the same thing. It's like, I have an OBGYN, I trust that OBGYN,
Right.
I'm not going somewhere else. And to be honest with you, when we get that credit letter, like, hey, we're going to protect your credit, we sort of just roll our eyes now.
I know.
Like,
How many of those can you have?
How many?
I mean, it feels like we all have 10 of those from breaches that have happened where we've been
exactly.
I want to talk about ransomware because it's a word, maybe you're hearing it more because you're here in this area, but I haven't heard it as much, and it feels like I haven't heard it as much in the industry. Are we starting to win some battles there?
I think cybersecurity programs, sort of generally speaking, at larger health systems are probably getting better. But at smaller health systems, mid-size and smaller health systems, where I think they still struggle for funding and resources, people and skill, the ability to do this well, they're still being hit. The adversaries have also sort of changed up tactics now. Not only are they doing ransomware, or maybe in some cases just saying, we're not even going to do ransomware, we're just going to get in and exfiltrate data, and then we're going to hold you hostage for the data. Like we're not going to do, or they do things that are just purely destructive, just to disrupt operations, and then talk to you about getting your data back.
Well, that's sort of the Lehigh Valley one was sort of like they took the data,
Yes.
they held onto it for a little bit, and then they came back to them and said,
Ratchet it up.
yeah, so they're getting more brazen.
More brazen, definitely. There is no limit to their creativity in terms of how to exploit and extort. It's really, when you talk about ransomware, my dentist's office got attacked. I mean, he's a 2-dog practice. So it's broader, and they came back after he fixed it. He thought he had fixed it, and he said there was one window left open. They came back in. So he said, my list?
A smaller health system CIO I was talking to was sort of downtrodden, hey, what's going on, that kind of stuff, cutting 8% of their staff across the entire team. Now, they're an Epic shop, so they have to worry about honor roll, and so they can only cut so much of that staff and whatever, and so cybersecurity is going to get hit. Testing is going to get hit. So you do the release and the testing and all that stuff. Isn't that like sowing the seeds for next breach? And if they're looking at you saying, look, you have to cut 8%, you know it's going to have to be cut. How do you stay ahead of it on the security side?
So I'll just go back to the bigger picture. The challenge with this, the support team is going to have to cut 8%, no matter what the support team is. They got to cut 8%. Are we reducing then what we're doing in the delivery of care or other things by 8%?
Well, that's what I'm concerned about. In cybersecurity, it's not like you're talking to the attackers saying, hey, look, can you give us a reprieve over here? Don't attack here.
Wish.
These attack surfaces we'd like to take off the table for a little while, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does. It sows the seeds for, in the operations space, people taking shortcuts or not quite finishing projects or dotting the I's and crossing the T's, which creates vulnerabilities that then ultimately are exploited by bad guys when they come in. On the cybersecurity side of the house, it's the same thing. You can have 65 pieces of software that you're using to monitor your cybersecurity space, but if you're not actually watching all of those dials, then you're burned.
I think that's the right point. You have fewer people to monitor the dials. I think more things get dropped. Cybersecurity is about paying attention to details. In all these stacks that we use, there's so many buttons and dials. It's very easy for you to lose a staff that knew how to use a tool that you don't have now. That problem is only going to continue, and I think the integrated platforms are going to come in and have to simplify it.
I think it drives toward risk too, right? The conversation of, yes, we can cut by 8%, but here's the new risk that we will be handing back to the organization to accept. And you've got to be clear on that.
Because that's the conversation I had with them. I'm like, just make it clear. If you're going to stop doing testing on releases, you have to make it clear to the clinical staff, you have to make it clear to the executive staff.
Much more likely we're going to have downtime, unscheduled downtime, because things aren't going to work the way that we have.
We're talking the EHR here. It's
I was just going to say.
It's a little scary. I do want to talk about those pervasive systems. I saw an article about Microsoft sort of getting under the microscope from a federal level, looking at their security practices and those kind of things. We have a lot of those kinds of systems. It's not just Microsoft. We have the EHR platform, we have the ERP platform, and everybody here would like to be a platform, right? To some sort of, how do we evaluate the practices and the readiness of those systems? You would think Microsoft would be way ahead of this. I was kind of surprised to see the article, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm trying not to get too Microsoft bashy here, but,
Right, but
from the Microsoft perspective, when you look at companies like Microsoft, they are many things to many people. They're Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and SQL
Right.
databases, and email, and lots of other things, and they have a security group. The challenge is that the generator, by and large, of urgent security patching requirements is Microsoft. And so you have to ask yourself, do I ask Microsoft to secure my software because it's a software I bought from Microsoft that needs to be patched and protected? And so there's just some of this logic that you have to kind of go through, I think, when you talk to those companies to understand what a better decision might be when it comes to cybersecurity.
But David, you talked about your solution to finding the hay in the haystack kind of thing. When we talk about moving to the cloud, I've talked to 3 CIOs who said, Epic and Azure. We are moving to Epic and Azure. Does that create a different environment? Or do we just have to start looking at it at a more granular level?
I think we're in that hybrid phase where we have even increased our surface area of concern for, do I have my on-prem? Do I have my hybrid environment secured? What data do I migrate into the cloud? How do I monitor the stuff that goes into the cloud? How are my users using the cloud? I think challenges are multiplied. Just because your data center is migrated, it doesn't mean your security is reduced. There's just more connectors. There are more places where your data is moving to. I think for the time being, as we work through the hybrid transition, it's going to be more challenging, to be honest.
Cloud security actually introduces
A lot more
variations of the risk,
Exactly.
right? And folks who are
It
really good,
shifts
Yeah, exactly. And they're even for folks who are really good at running cybersecurity programs for products that are on premise, shifting to the cloud is a whole different ballgame.
Exactly.
And so we see a lot of breaches that happen with products in the cloud that again are kind of back to the basics.
Yeah.
It's simple misconfigurations that have left a door open that somebody can just walk in because it's an open port, an open hole that they can just.
And then you have the other surface area of attack, which is all these web APIs that are being built for these cloud applications. And who's monitoring that for?
How well are those being built?
How are
How
those
many
being
holes
built?
are in those?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do they test them? How do they pen test them? Because now you're out in the breeze.
We know
Everybody's out
adversaries love that too, because if they can get into an API stream, they get everything
Absolutely.
that's in the stream.
That's always been my concern, that just because I now have it in the cloud and outside of the perimeter of my on-prem solution, who is it opened up to for these exploits?
We'll get back to our show in just a minute. We have a great webinar coming up for you in April. We just finished our March one on April 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the first Thursday of every month. We're going to have our leadership series. This one is on CISO priorities for 2023, Chief Information Security Officers. We have a great panel. We have Eric Decker with Intermountain, Shauna Hofer with St. Luke's Health System out of Boise, Idaho, and Vic Aurora with Hospital for Special Surgery. And we are going to delve into what are the priorities for security? What are we seeing? What are the new threat vectors? What is top of mind for this group? If you want to be a part of these webinars, and we would love to have you be a part of them, go ahead and sign up. You can go to our website, thisweekhealth.com. Top right-hand corner, you'll see our webinar. And when you get to that page, go ahead and fill out your information. Don't forget to put a question in there. One of the things that we do, I think that is pretty distinct, is we collect, like for today's webinar, we had 50 some odd questions that we utilized in order to make sure that the conversation is the conversation that you want us to have with these executives. So really appreciate you guys being a part of it and look forward to seeing you on that webinar. Now, back to the show.
I'm going to try to ask a question here, and I'm going to form it as I go because it's going to be kind of goofy. GPT-4 has been mentioned there used to be a hype cycle where I expect to see the next one that we see from Gartner, where the hype cycle, they've like increased the level.
Did they have to make the charts smaller to show how high
the upper right corner?
But my thesis on why that is there's a hype cycle, right? And so a bunch of people started using it, and it exceeded their expectations,
Yeah.
and that was like, hey, have you guys looked at? Have you looked at? And then people went out and used it again, and they would go, wow, this is really
from basic GPT to GPT-4. I don't know, it may be a fast track to the slope of enlightenment, or the slope of enlightenment conversation may mostly be around how are you integrating this into your product or into your software.
I'm going to come back to security, but it feels to me like OpenAI somehow got first mover advantage over Google, and I don't know how they did it. I'm not sure anybody else understands how they did it. Like all of a sudden, because Google had all of those, a lot of those capabilities, right? I won't say all of those, but a lot of those capabilities, and then all of a sudden OpenAI, it went from 3 to 3.5 to 4 like overnight. Now they're opening up the API and they're doing partnerships, and you're sitting there going, wow, that was fast. Like what just happened here?
It's the accelerated rate at which AI technologies is being innovated and adopted. I think that's only going to accelerate, but the concern is that AI will build on itself to be even faster, to basically have that multiplier effect, applying AI to improve its own AI. And what would that do? When AI is now able to write code, I've tested a bunch of different examples. It's kind of scary, actually.
It is.
And every software engineer I know goes, my job is going to be done in 5 years. There's going to be a program.
Well, you're a true coder. I mean, you're probably a hacker like
I'm
I am.
very much a hacker.
Yeah, but us hackers now,
You could use it.
we can use it. Like I did. I wrote a plugin for WordPress, and I just went in and said, and I'm like, I don't like those variables. So I went back
Can
and
I change it?
I said, hey, because I have other code in there, I'm like, I want you to match my variables. And when I'm using it, just sort of dropped it in. I was
Or
like,
give me 4 other options for these 2 lines of code, and it'll rewrite. Like if something doesn't work, you can go line by line and kind of just try things
know.
out. You don't have to be a coder.
So-
It'll figure out.
So I would-
over
Does
time
that
what's going
mean
on.
to the attackers?
well, I do want to talk. I do want to talk about potential, but I do want to talk about cybersecurity. One of the things that we do all the time is we just give our information away, right? And I'm thinking about how physicians are going to use it. I got a phone call early on in my CIO career, and it was from Dropbox, and they said, "Hey, congratulations, you're one of the largest users of Dropbox."
We don't have a contract.
We don't have a contract. We didn't have any agreement. I talked to people who are just like, we're not using Dropbox, but our physicians were using it because it was a nice, effective way to share PHI and clinical information with. And I'm like, oh, we've got to rope this in as quickly as we can. That same thing's going to happen with GPT-4.
Absolutely.
It's already happening, right? Physicians are getting
You're using it to write notes?
notes, prior auths, they're using it to write.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, okay, if they're doing that, then they're feeding information into that prompt. What information are they feeding into that prompt? Can they feed PHI into that prompt? They could feed PHI into that prompt.
We're thinking of using it to generate samples, for example.
Yeah, it looks giving it away. We're not even logging. I mean, I guess you do log into this. You do log in, but we're giving that information away. Is that an attack vector we need to start worrying about?
Oh, I think so. I think we're feeding data into the cloud, into all these services, into all these applications in ways that IT doesn't have visibility into.
So my Dropbox story is probably happening all the time.
It happens all the time.
I mean, I think we have a chronic third-party risk management challenge in healthcare. Because we use software as a service, we don't build a lot of stuff ourselves. We use software as a service, so all of our data is going into somebody else's cloud somewhere. That creates centers of gravity where if the bad guys can't break into that system, they get 25 or 55 health systems data,
all together,
not just one organization. So those organizations become targets. And it's easier to be able to get access to those things without going through the normal permission process of supply chain and all of that. If you're in a health system, you have a credit card, you can sort of file a claim next month. You can go out and just buy a lot of things yourself. So department heads are going out and doing things like Dropbox or others, just doing it on their own, creating exposure for your organization that
in unknown manners.
Yeah.
All
signing off on risk.
Workflows.
Signing off on risk, they're not approved to sign off on.
Well, you were in California. I mean, we had physician practices that were foundation members. I think people think we have authority over those things.
Yeah.
We didn't have much authority over those physician practices.
Right.
And so they could do some silly things with information that was connected. And then essentially when they get breached though, we are
falls back to the
largest entity.
Right.
I do want to talk, I want to geek out a little bit on the potential, and we started down that path. The programming aspect of it is really interesting to me, and I think we're going to spawn a generation of prompters, people who know how to interact with AI correctly, and it's interesting. So my camera person is on the other side here, and her job is to take these notes, and she just graduated from college like 2 months ago. But she's going to take these notes and turn it into a note for our podcast. And it'll be a couple paragraphs of what we talked about. She has no idea what half of the stuff we do. She started using GPT-4, and she writes really great notes. And so I said to her, I'm like, how do you know so much about clinical background? Because we do a lot of clinical. And she's just like, I put it in ChatGPT and spit it out, and there it is. And I'm like, that's...
Give me a 2-paragraph summary of the thing that I'm going to give you, and then it just comes out.
I did a whole FAQ section just basically saying, hey, what would it do if I threw it in there? It was pretty good.
And your FAQs are...
The FAQs are hand edited, but a lot of the stuff could be boilerplate generated using ChatGPT.
Right.
Because
so it's not quite hallucinations. I mean, because we hear that thing of it's been trained on some good data and bad data, and it can generate some bad things. But it could also generate stuff that the human looks at and goes,
that's pretty...
It's good,
yes.
But we should edit it somewhere.
Right. That's why we hand review everything.
You and I talked about coding, though, and you were saying, hey, let's just assume I don't want it to write code. I just want it to document my code.
You could do that too. It'll read it. It'll insert what
Comment
it thinks.
it out. Yeah.
But the ability for it to write code is what I think is going to be somewhat scary, because you don't need to understand the interface of APIs anymore, because APIs interfaces are the details, right? You just want to say, functionally, I want the thing to do this, and can you dovetail it into this API, and it will just
Well, the API is built as standard work, right? So it's also a really easy thing for it to understand.
Exactly.
Oh, well, here's how I flow that, because I know what all of these
I know how to
API
associate
references
these
are.
linkages,
Yeah.
and
Well,
I think in a couple of years.
Did you guys saw the release where they just showed it a picture of a website, and it went from seeing the website. Now, this hasn't been released yet, but essentially it looked at the picture, the image of the website, and it said, okay, here's your HTML code, here's your JavaScript code,
Wow.
here's your whatever, and it just sort of dropped it all out. And I'm sitting there going, all right, that just turned your UI UX people into, I mean,
design.
let's assume they're not going to write the final code, but they literally could say, we have a demo of this in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They could write it out and say, all right, here's the demo. And they go, yeah, we really like that. And then you go back to the code organization and say,
you got a boilerplate.
yeah.
All software is developed in an iterative fashion. You start with the first working instance, and then you tweak little bits of it to get to where you want it to be.
But what about these other companies? What about like Adobe? Adobe has Adobe XD. And I don't know if you ever use it. I use it all the time for like graphical designs of websites and that sort of stuff. Why wouldn't they utilize OpenAI, do a deal with OpenAI, and say, here's your Adobe XD. Oh, by the way, you ready for code?
Boom.
Click the button
Press
and
the button.
boom, out it pops.
It's just one of many things I think you could do. I think AI innovation is going to grow exponentially in the next couple of years.
But even for me personally, I write a lot and I present a lot. And so I'll often sit down and sort of bang some stuff into ChatGPT around, this is kind of where I'm going. Can you make some suggestions for an outline? And it'll come back with an outline, which I won't necessarily like, but it will cause me to think about things that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise.
Exactly.
So it makes me a better writer or a better creator of content, because it's like my writing buddy. It's like my writing partner. It's making suggestions, and it's not offended when I say, that's crap, I'm not doing that, but you have made me think of something else. And then we can refine that in our ongoing conversation. I mean, it is a little creepy.
It
but
is.
You
But
start to
that's
feel
how-
like it is a partner of yours and helping you do some stuff.
Somebody was saying to me, it's not going to replace a doctor. I'm like, it's not meant to replace a doctor. It's a minion for the doctor.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I need to do this task, this task, this. Bill Gates, we'll close with this. Bill Gates was talking about this, and he goes, you're getting a glimpse into what the future looks like.
Exactly.
And the future is, each one of us will have a personal AI assistant. And it will take the information that we give it, and it'll say, oh, you hike. Hey, there's a
the
sale
more
on
you
these.
use it, the more it knows about you.
And he said, we used to go out to a site and say, hey, give me all the different airlines. Instead, our personal assistant will say, hey, I see you're going from Seattle to Nashville. I'll keep an eye on the airlines and try to find you the lowest price on the airlines that you prefer.
Yeah.
I know that you have miles on this and this. Each one of us with a personal assistant.
Oh, I think that's a dream.
Very viable.
You have a digital assistant instead of that dog. Remember the dog, the personal assistant?
Or Clippy.
Or the Clippy.
Yeah, Clippy. Now they
We're
can
going back
finally-
to, but this one's really powerful.
Yeah,
It's-
it
This
actually
one's
knows
very
what it's
powerful.
doing.
I think the ability for it to infer, the ability for it to include its own options as part of the generative side.
What's the trough of disillusionment? Is there a trough of disillusionment that you can envision right now?
I think people right now are so enamored with what it can do that it's going to be a long time before there's a trough of disillusionment of, gee, I wanted to go to Nashville, you sent me to Washington, or...
I think there's this weird situation of like, we had such low expectations, and we all got blown away by how good it was.
Exactly.
We're going to raise our expectations
Right.
to meet that.
We're going to start having these
That may be the trough
conversations
of
like,
the
where's my
solution.
personal digital
Yeah,
assistant?
exactly. I thought we were going to have flying cars.
Flying
That's
cars.
didn't happen.
And we will end on flying cars. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Bill, thank you. Great Drex.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the news. If I were a CIO today, I think what I would do is I'd have every team member listening to a show just like this one and trying to have conversations with them after the show about what they've learned and what we can apply to our health system. If you want to support This Week Health, one of the ways you can do that is you can recommend our channels to a peer or to one of your staff members. We have 2 channels, This Week Health Newsroom and This Week Health Conference. You can check them out anywhere you listen to podcasts, which is a lot of places. Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, you name it, you can find it there. You can also find us on YouTube. And of course, you can go to our website, thisweekhealth.com. And we want to thank our Newsday partners, again, a lot of them, and we appreciate their participation in this show. Cedars-Sinai Accelerator, ClearSense, CrowdStrike, Digital Scientists, Optimum, Pure Storage, SureTest, Tausight, Lumion, and VMware, who have invested in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.